All right, here's a second question. How can Christians pray for those who have left their faith, and how can prayer be a part of the process of rebuilding relationships?
Yeah. So I think one of the very best things about, praying for your friend in that situation is it kind of reminds you that, oh yeah, I'm not the only one who cares about him.
Mhm.
You're bringing him for God actually cares about him, right? We have all these nicknames for God, the Hound of Heaven and things like that. And you're like, oh, whatever this person has changed in terms of their feeling about God, God hasn't changed such that he no longer is the Hound of Heaven, that he no longer cares for lost sheep. So I think praying kind of reminds us that we're pretty much like a shepherd intern who's running to the great shepherd saying, a wolf is stealing one of the sheep. What do we do? And once the great shepherd says, hey, that's great, I'm on it. I mean, that gives you some room to relax, right? The great shepherd is on it. I don't have to worry so much about the shepherd. And by all means, you're the shepherd, you go with him. You want to do your part to help. But we get this weird sense of kind of a loss of a sense of self-perspective of how important is my role. And just like you mentioned, I've thought that a million times. I want to say the right thing. I've got to say the magic thing. And to just say, hey, you don't actually have to be all of that. God is the one who's kind of the key player here. And I think a lot of times the most important things are kind of the circumstances that God uses in the course of events to bring a person back around to himself, to back around to God. And the bottom line is we're not actually in charge of their circumstances. And if you think of the prodigal son. So he, basically abandons his dad, or, gets his inheritance, runs off, and he goes and squanders all this money. There's all these sorts of, terrible things. And, did the father need to be praying a lot? God, get him in a pigsty. So he's hungry, but wants to eat the corn cobs, but the pigs get him first. And then he'll come back to me. It's like, what the father of the son needed to do at that point, the most important thing he do is be prepared to welcome that son back. And God was in charge of these circumstances that actually forced that kid to turn around and come running home. But we don't have to orchestrate that. God is kind of, here's a great phrase, he's the master of circumstance. We talk about a master of ceremonies who's, making the whole show happen and next person on. Well, to think about that God is somehow, he's the master of circumstances for this person you're so worried about. Remember, he's the guy who's doing that. And you need to be there to welcome, to woo, to do whatever you can. But your praying, I think, is as much an exercise in getting you rightly oriented as it is about saying the magic prayer that will then, unlock the mystery of what's kept this person's soul from God.
That's so good. I love that, Rick. And everything you said just so rich. And I think one of those aspects too, it helps us feel like I'm doing something. Because sometimes even that we talk about the relationship, it could very easily be the case that they don't want anything to do with me. And so it's very hard to reach out, try to connect. I mean, there's just an animosity. I did that getting ready for the series with another former student who's yet to respond. But it makes me go, but God, I can pray. And again, like you said, I'm not the answer anyways. God's the one who's working it out. And it gives me a sense of I can do something. I'm not completely devoid of being engaged,
Yeah.
So
in kind of simple daily prayers. You don't have to even do the extensive prayer, but just kind of lifting these people up. I think you're right. It makes you feel like, hey, I'm doing something. And as long as you keep your ears open, sometimes God may speak to you and say, hey, Rick, I really appreciate if you do what you just talked about. Just give the guy a call, right? You don't have to know the magic and say, well, why don't you just, hey, I was just thinking about you the other day, or I was coming through town and wonder if you want to get coffee. Those are these little proddings that sometimes we hear best in the context of being active and praying for somebody too. So
no, that's awesome. So good.